All right, so this is hello everybody. My name is Maceo Paisley, and this is No Pressure, No Shame presents Ask a Preacher's Daughter. This is a series produced by Citizens of Culture under the No Pressure, No Shame mantle. No Pressure, No Shame is a program that seeks to redefine modern romance that is starting from dating and taking you all the way into family planning, childhood, children and young parents. So whether you are single and ready to mingle, or if you are getting ready to bring, your third or fourth kid into the world, we aim to provide a lens that looks at family and romance and sex and relationships in a modern and contemporary way from different vantage points. And the Ask Us series is where we ask different individuals to share their expertise and perspective on these topics from the place where they occupy in the world. So I'm really, really, really excited to introduce somebody who seems like they're a sister from another mister. Um, Erica Williams Simon, author, and I'm actually going to let her do her own introduction because I know I'm going to miss stuff. But I will start off by saying that if you haven't read You Deserve the Truth, you should check it out. I've read the first half of it and then I listened to the audiobook. So, ladies and gentlemen, beans and means, Erica Williams Simon. Hello.
Hi, Maceo. Yes, you are my brother from another mother. And I'm so happy to be here with you and with everyone else. So how do I describe myself? So there's two ways. So one is like the work stuff, right? So I'm an author, I'm a host. My work is really all about leading conversations and creating spaces for conversations about who we are and how we want to live. And that's like the collective we. And so I've done that in a number of different sectors. I started off my career in politics and was always trying to bring people together to have important conversations. And I was, a spokesperson and sparking dialogue around quote unquote important issues. And then I did that in media. I did that in tech at Snapchat. I built a program called the Creators Lab, which brought storytellers and creators together. And then in the next season of my life, I think I'm really going to be focused on doing that work around faith in that sector. But the true answer, when people say, like, who are you, is not what I do. The best way to answer that is I'm Tom and Debbie's daughter. That's what I always say, because if you, that kind of, I think, encapsulates really so much about who I am and whose shoulders I stand on, and also how I see the world, for better or for worse, right? So much of my life starts with my origin story. So that's me, Tom and Debbie's daughter.
I love it. I love it. Well, I think that, as I was saying before we started recording, I'm going to say it again. No Pressure, No Shame is a really, oftentimes, really progressive conversation around gender fluidity, sex positivity, finding your orgasm, recovering from sexual assault, dealing with a sexually transmitted disease. And I thought, yeah, this is all great. This is all part of the well-rounded conversation. But what about the conversation for the folks who are just learning that this world exists, or maybe they're seeing the world happen around them in this modern, fast-paced way, but they're not operating from that place as a living practice. And they're more power to, and their philosophy is more power to the people that are doing the non-monogamy thing, but I like monogamy, or, and particularly people of faith who are, in my case, Christian. I think that's yours as well. But how do we make sense of this world with romance and dating, particularly when our social groups might be, we spend a lot of time around people or consume a lot of media that isn't sort of speaking to us.
Yeah.
And I know that your work seeks to make sense of a lot of this. And I just wanted to invite you on the top to chat about this. And maybe the best way to start is actually in the same way that you said with your Tom and Debbie's daughter, maybe just creating some framing around who you are in terms of how you see yourself and how your sort of romantic relationship story, or a romantic identity,
Yeah. Well, I'll pick up with the Tom and Debbie's daughter piece. So I'm the daughter of two pastors who started our church in our basement when I was 9 months old. And so for most of my life, church was both our faith expression, but also the family business. It was kind of, I woke up in the morning and was thinking about it and went to bed thinking about it. And I was actually not the pastor's kid that you see like stereotyped, on TV where, oh, the secret rebel who hated it and wanted to break out. I think I was naturally, some is nurture, but also some I think is nature of how you're wired. And I was wired in a way that I actually really enjoyed faith and religion and ritual and practice and community and all of the stuff that church represented to me. Granted, it was a very different experience for some others, and I fully understand and respect that, but my childhood experience in church was actually relatively pleasant and enjoyable. And so I think that shaped a lot of how I looked at the world, and not necessarily the dogma. We'll get to that a little bit later, but just that foundation of you're supposed to come together with other people and wrestle through life and thinking about God and who we are together, that is the way we live. That kind of was my foundation. And then my father passed away suddenly when I was 16, and my life kind of went into a spiral, but church still remained an anchor for me. And I met my boyfriend, who then became my husband, when I was a junior in high school. We both went to, we lived in PG County, Maryland, but went to a school out in the suburbs, and we were a handful of Black kids that went to this all-white Catholic school. And so we immediately connected, became best friends. And his faith background is very different than mine. His father's an atheist. He was never into church. And yet somehow we kind of came together and formed this relationship and then this life that has been, I guess, when it comes to the romantic part of our relationship, pretty conventional, pretty traditional. I think we've had very non-traditional careers, our approach to life and family planning and all those things I think are a bit outside the box, but for the most part, I mean, he's been mine and I've been his, and that's been the way it has been for a very long time.
Right on. So y'all met in high school?
We met in high school.
So I like this story because there's a couple things. You said you didn't have I don't know exactly what the word was. I was trying to write it down, but you didn't have the sort of traumatic faith experience that people talk about.
No.
Right. And I also heard you say that you're with your high school sweetheart.
Yes.
And this is something that is really traditional sounding.
Yes.
And for many, 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 many people, this was the dream.
Right.
And then as the world has changed, the institution of marriage, the church, monogamy has come under attack. And like I say, and not without good reason, actually.
Oh, it should have come under attack. Yes.
And so, but what that has done has left opportunities for people to, one, leave the church, two, push back against monogamy, but also push against, but through that pushing against something, maybe we find ourselves in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a relationship between faith and love, regardless of the faith you practice. Certainly in my faith, in Abrahamic religions, we say God is love, but there is a relationship between faith, or sort of a loss of faith, not just in religious institutions, but in the construct of a marriage or a relationship that's like sort of sanctified by this holy or faithful union.
Yeah.
So I want to hear you talk a little bit more how you think of your union and your bond, and then we'll go into the how it's not traumatic part.
Right. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. So I think the first thing that you said was that for a lot of people, that story that happens to be my story was the dream. And I think that is also fundamentally challenging, right? That there are a lot of reasons why a particular narrative, a particular experience of life and love is held up as the ideal. I think it's been dangerous for so many reasons. And it's partially because of how we frame marriage and how we frame relationships and love and monogamy as in some way a goal of life, right? That my purpose for being is really ultimately to be partnered and to make a family. And I don't believe that at all. I believe, so Archbishop Desmond Tutu says this a lot, and he's, I'm sure, not the only one, but that's just my framework for it. When he talks about the Zulu principle of Ubuntu, which is I am because we are, that we are human in relationship to other humans, that we are persons because other people are persons, and that we kind of grow and develop our own humanity in relationship, right? And so the way that I actually see marriage is just a crucible for that type of development. It is certainly not the only place for it. Relationships of all kinds.
Wait a minute, you're smarter than me, so I'm gonna pause you. What is a crucible?
It's like
how do you think of it?
Like a place where metals, a heated place where metals meld together and kind of are refined. And so marriage is, I think, one of the most intense ways to practice Ubuntu. It's one of the most intense ways to be in relationship with someone in a way that forces you to grow and to change and to evolve. It is more, I believe, about that than it is about this idealized, romanticized version of forever. Unfortunately, that's the part that society is focused more on, right? That the forever and the building a family until death do us part. And while that is beautiful, and, you know, I say, like Winnie the Pooh says to him all the time, like, I hope, you know, if you live to be 100, I live to be 100 minus a day, because I never want to live without you. Like, that is absolutely how I feel, but that is not the purpose of marriage, right?
Right. The container.
It's the container, and it's to be more human. To grow, to learn, to change, to evolve, to be my highest self. And I think marriage is a fantastic way to do that. And when you find a person that you want to do that with, that is ultimately what that commitment is about, to me and to Yanda.
Right. So I love this, that you have a life. If I'm drawing these different concentric circles, you have a life. It includes your career. It includes marriage. It includes your spiritual practice. It includes your diet. It includes fashion. It includes beauty, right? It includes whatever your fitness routine is. And that's one of the buckets.
Yeah.
Of your life.
It's one of the buckets. And I think I was going to say all, but I don't know if that's 100% true, because I don't know how fashion influences me, but most of the buckets inform one another, right? So faith, I would say, for me, is probably the biggest bucket. It's the bucket that like overflows and drips down into almost every other area of my life. And so it has absolutely informed my marriage and my relationship. But what I'll also say about my faith journey is that even though it was not traumatic for me in any way, and I still have such warm feelings for my upbringing in church and even religion in general, I was also raised to be a thinker and to be someone who explores and learns and questions. And I think that skill is what allowed me, the combination of a privileged experience in religion, and by privileged, I mean being in a religion where I was not harmed. That privileged experience in combination with my thinking mind and being raised to question is what has allowed me over time to create a framework within religion that works for me.
You did something here a second ago, and I don't know if you did it on purpose or on accident, but this is where I'm going to ask you to double tap on. You said your faith definitely is one of the things that informs your marriage and relationship. Do you mean to say that as two separate things, or there is your marriage and then there's the relationship that you have with your partner? Or is it that you were just using two words to help clarify?
I think I was just using two words to help clarify, but since you double tapped there, I'm thinking about it. And I guess you could say that those are, I think they are. Because I had a relationship with my husband before we entered into an institution of marriage, right? And that relationship is based on certain things. It's based on friendship. It's based on physical attraction. It has all of these pieces to it. And then there is the building of this institution in a way that we hope will sustain us and, and be that crucible. And that requires a different skill set, different intentions. And so it almost in some ways becomes its own thing, even outside of us.
So this is one question that I did not put on the
Go ahead.
So talk to me about unconditional love. What is it? Is it real? Is it not? How do you people hear this? People say this. You seem to have, been blessed with the high school sweetheart. Like, what is your hot take on unconditional love?
Okay. So from a Christian tradition, we use the term agape, right? This type of unconditional love that is modeled by God. Or, God incarnate that is modeled by Christ.
Right.
And so do I believe it exists? Yes.
Okay.
What does that look like in human form? I don't know. Because sometimes, so when I used to be asked this question, this was my answer. I do believe that unconditional love exists, but unconditional love does not mean that you have to stay in a particular environment. It doesn't mean that the nature of your relationship will not change. Right? Unconditional love does not mean there can be deal breakers for your relationship. And you can still unconditionally love the person. So I think that's the typical answer I would give. But then sometimes I question, is it even possible if God is the model for unconditional love, if theoretically, if our creator is the highest form of that love, is it even possible for fallible humans to experience that, to know that? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I tend to be cynical and say, if I am a sinner who falls short of God's glory every day, and God's love, and God is love, and it's all encompassing, then the love that I have to offer is also a minuscule fraction of what is there. And so in relationship, I always say, well, you got to have your relationship to your creator, and you got to have, and so this is where we go into that self-love, sort of self-care, independence, interdependence part, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Socrates, maybe not Socrates specifically, but the Greeks would talk about, I think this was Socrates, talk about your better half, and this idea of soulmates. And maybe those two are not necessarily directly connected, but this idea of someone having a better half, and I think about that, and I also think about the interdependence of all human beings.
Yes.
But I also think about a particular kind of bond between two people who decide to, one, enter into marriage or enter into long-term partnership of any kind, whether there's a paper stamp or not. And so for me, I guess my question to you, which maybe is a little challenging, how do you think of yourself in relation to your partner and to your relationship, if those are like different things? When that bubble needs more care, that bubble needs more attention, that bubble of relationship needs more energy and more time in certain periods and seasons of life. I guess I don't know if there's the question is forming, but it kind of has to do with how do you see yourself, this interweaving between yourself and your partner, yourself and your relationship. How do you make sense of, and I guess the reason I stutter is because I don't want to lead you into an answer by the way I frame the question.
Got it.
But how do you make sense of your relationship to your relationship?
Got it. Okay. So I always think of it like this. God made me. God made him. God didn't make us. We made us. Right? Like we made a choice to create a relationship. And so Allende, that's my partner's name, Allende, as an individual being, right, is holy, is sanctified, is this amazing kind of temple of spirit that God made, and so am I, as two separate beings. And then with our free will, we came together and said, I like that, I like this, let's do this thing together. And so the thing that we as humans chose to create is going to need work, and it's going to be flawed, and it's going to have to change and evolve, and we're going to have to grow to manage it. And then you said that, I think what the key word is just seasons. Mm-hmm. Particularly when you've been with someone as long as we have, or if you have the idea of marriage that is like till death do us part, and in a dream world we're together for 50, 60 years. I mean, if you're taking that vision of life, there are going to be seasons. That is just how life unfolds. And so in the same way that it unfolds for me as an individual and him as an individual, it will unfold for this thing that we have made. And there'll be seasons.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Just FYI, we have a guest on the webinar now. If you have a question, you can type it in now, and we'll get to it in a little bit. You can just type it in as we go, or you can hold your question, and we'll bring it up at the end. But either way, I just wanted to acknowledge that, and thank you for being here. And then of course we're going to edit and sort of publish it as a podcast episode. So feel free to speak freely and sneeze or whatever you got to do. So one of the things that I had wanted to talk about was this idea of people being sort of spiritual orphans, or people that have had bad experiences, and how do you feel? Because you said, I mean, this is why I wanted to talk about these things together, is you said earlier is wrestle with life in community. And then you also said how marriage is a crucible for like development, evolution as a human being. Mm-hmm. And so to me, there is a connection between community, mm-hmm. and particularly a faith community, as an opportunity to wrestle with life in a sort of tightly knit group of people, or a knitted group of people. And then maybe the same kind of thing actually is a concentrated, more focused community of two, mm-hmm. that maybe looks like marriage. Yes. And so how do we make sense of it when people have been damaged by these institutions, A, marriage, or B, the church? And I kind of use them interchangeably in this moment, simply because in the context that we're talking about it, those two things happen together. Yeah.
I mean, I don't take that lightly, that the institution of religion, all religions, but in particular Christianity, and when we're talking a U.S. context, I mean, it's incredibly harmful, incredibly damaging. And I kind of wrestled with that until I found the work of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And he defines religion as not the presence of God. Religion is absolutely not the presence of God, because God is ineffable, and we don't know. I mean, God is too big for our minds to even fully comprehend. But that religion is man's best attempt, or human's best attempt, to capture it, to harness it, to use it, to experience it. And so in that, there are inevitably flaws. Anything that involves human creation is going to, unfortunately, I believe, harm people, damage people eventually, whether intentionally or inadvertently. And I think religion has done both. Mm-hmm. That's just fact. But I have never been a throw the baby out with the bathwater person, again, because I am able to sit from a place of privilege and having not been harmed myself. So I actually think it's incumbent upon those of us who haven't been hurt to kind of go spread the word that, like, hey, guess what? In case you were confused, in case someone lied to you, God is not confined to that building God is not confined to the way that this set of people have taught this religion. God is not confined to that. There is beauty in tradition, and there is beauty in shared ritual. And that is ultimately what I think religion can do and can bring to our culture and to our society. But it is not God, and it does not contain, and we should not, and this is where I think many of us, whether religious or non-religious, what we have somehow gotten wrong is that we have relinquished the responsibility of our spiritual formation to institutions, period. That whether you are religious or not, it is not an institution's responsibility, whether they want it or not. It is not their responsibility to form me spiritually, to form my connection with God.
Right. I love this, because going back, just ping-ponging back into relationships, kind of sounds like, to me, in that same way, logically, what you're also saying is that marriage isn't the finish line. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To your relationship development and to your sort of emotional partner development.
Right. I mean, it all goes back to the freedom of choice to do what helps you evolve into the best human possible. And so for if your framework is that happens in relationship, then you can put marriage as a part of your toolkit, right? You can say that one of the ways that I really, really want to grow and to develop in connection with other humans is marriage, because this appeals to me in this way, because I find it challenging, because it's for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. But it is absolutely not the only way.
Mm-hmm. Would you ever feel that, I've heard people say they feel trapped in a marriage, and I don't know what they mean by that necessarily in all contexts. So, yeah, I can't speak to this, but this idea that you do it, it's forever, and you're stuck, or you are locked into this thing, and that if you leave it, then you're a failure of some kind. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? So for those of people out there that are in a marriage or engagement even, mm-hmm. and they're feeling like, well, I've said this thing, I've said these words, I've made this vow, I've made this promise before God or not, the state, wherever. And there is a kind of absolutism associated with that. Mm-hmm. How do we make sense of that dynamic?
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, if you feel trapped, get out. I mean, of anything, because being trapped is not a good, healthy way to live. If you feel trapped by anything, religion, marriage, whatever, I say get out, get free. Because I think we are meant to be free human beings and not feel trapped and constrained. I think sometimes, though, we use that language loosely. Mm-hmm. And we say trapped maybe when what we really mean is that we have established some boundaries in our own lives that we no longer want to live within, or that don't feel good to us in this moment. And then only you can decide, what does that mean? Is this a challenge of discipline? Is there some element of these boundaries that you entered into because, again, of your ultimate goal, that you believe they can help serve your ultimate goal? And if so, it's not going to feel comfortable all the time. Mm. It just isn't. No boundaries feel comfortable all the time, and no opportunities for growth feel comfortable all the time. But it again goes back to, what is your higher good? What is your reason for being married? And I think so many people get married because you should, or because it looks good, or because it's what you've been told you're supposed to do. And so if that's the case, you probably will feel trapped eventually. If it doesn't serve your higher good, and if not just yours, your partner's, if there's no shared higher good or commitment together, it becomes really difficult.
Right. So I really think that's well put. I love everything you're saying, and you're really painting a great picture, but I don't want people to think that you're just, a goody two shoes sitting in your little Christian bubble. And so I want to talk to you about, like, the world, as they say. Mm-hmm. And
secular.
Yeah. And, like, you see this stuff, around, and we have friends, and they live the lives they live, and there's Instagram and media, and the world is really changing in some really exciting and beautiful ways around sexuality, around gender,
identity. Yep.
and a lot of this stuff is not in the Bible at all. Like in the way that it's being said. I have never, like, if you took a digital version of the Bible, of the Quran, of the Torah, you cannot find the word gender nonconforming.
No, you can't.
You just will not find it.
Gender nonconforming people existed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is actually the point, is that these folks totally existed, but in the context of sex positivity, liberated people, women having agency in their sexuality, there isn't necessarily directly a scripture that can point to a young lady who's having feelings, who's having experiences that are going to say, yep, women, they do have healthy, active agency in their sex life, right? And so for me, the question that I have for you is around, how are you, or maybe actually, you know what was it like growing up the way you did, and then now seeing what we would call like sexual liberation or agency come to be as, I forget even what they call it. When Kim Kardashian posts a selfie and it's suggestive of women's empowerment.
Oh, right. That's such a broad phrase. Yeah.
So how did you grow up, and you have now you're married as well, and I think a lot of people that deal with this, I dealt with this, where I'm like, well, actually what's happening is, can you hear that?
Why?
Okay. What's actually happening as part of my journey to be a good Christian is I'm actually being indoctrinated as well into heteronormativity, right? Into patriarchy, into X, Y, Z, right? Into essentially a repressed sexual being. So what was your experience with all this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other questions you asked in that too was like, looking back now, but also seeing where we are as a society and some of these conversations that are happening, how does it make me feel? And it makes me feel very, very happy. Very happy, because there are conversations that need to be had. And here's the thing, it's not like they weren't happening before, it's they weren't happening in healthy ways, and they were happening with women in particular, or folks who identify as female and femme, cloaked in shame. Humans are humans. People have been feeling things and doing things since the beginning of time, but they, organized religion has made it so that there's certain things that are taboo to talk about, and therefore if you can't talk about things, you can't express them, and if you can't express them, you can't be them, and there's this whole cycle. So I'm just happy that we're doing and talking about what is the real lived experience, right, of being human. So to answer your question about how I grew up, I mean, yeah, I grew up pretty socially conservative. I mean, politically liberal, right? Like we were civil rights activists and all that good stuff. But when it came to like gender and sex, it was like pretty in the box, right? You're not supposed to have premarital sex. And I remember things that I didn't pay attention to at the time, but as an adult, I look back. I had one of my best friends was sexually active, and it got found out, and now if you're going to hear this later, I'm giving air quotes, it got found out at church that she was sexually active. And I remembered at the time being what I thought was a good friend, and like, it's okay, God will forgive you, don't let, it's all right. And I was on her side in the sense that I was like, I hope she doesn't get in trouble, but there was still this language of like, it's okay, you can be forgiven from that terrible, horrible sin. I distinctly remember there was this really popular sermon series at the time called No More Sheets. No More Sheets.
Okay.
By this woman preacher named Juanita Bynum. And it was like the 90s version of going viral, right, in the Christian community, evangelical Black Christian community. And I watched it again a couple years ago and was horrified. The level of slut shaming, woman shame. I mean, it was just, I was cringing. I couldn't finish watching it. But at the time, it felt like so empowering. We're going to talk about how women can regain our power as women of God by keeping our legs closed. You know what I mean? Like that's what it was. So to the extent we can talk about some of this stuff now, and also thinking about so how do I navigate that landscape now, though, still as a person of faith, is I specifically look for voices in the culture that talk about these issues from a faith perspective, but from a modern and advanced and progressive and liberal faith perspective. So there's a woman named Candace Benbow who writes a lot about female sexuality, in particular Black female sexuality and religion, and she's a theologian. And so I just love reading and learning about how people are merging these worlds together in a way that I hope brings us more freedom. I mean, that's the thing. Ultimately, despite what we've been taught, the Bible is a liberation text. It is the story of an oppressed people getting free from the state. Like that's what it is. Mm-hmm. That's who, that's what the story of Christ is, right? Christ was a brown-skinned Palestinian man born to a single mother who was murdered by the state. And the whole book is about freedom and liberation. And so to the extent that we have more leaders and thinkers and cultural influencers who are sharing that truth, I'm just excited that it's like setting so many of us free from all of these boxes that we were told we had to stay in.
All right. Amen. Okay.
Don't get me started on this stuff.
No, but I'm gonna push back on this one because you did say you grew up, politically progressive, but like kind of socially conservative. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the case right now, is that we find a tension between being what we call woke and also maybe being what we call Christian, right? Mm-hmm. In the sense of, you talked about slut shaming, but we also talk about, transgender and homosexuality, right? The conventional narrative around this stuff is no, right? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of want to ask you a little bit more how you carry the two in your brain.
Yeah.
Like, what do I tell what would you tell somebody who is, who just says, you know what, I hear about this transgender stuff, and you know what, I don't get it. Mm-hmm. I don't get it, and it's not in the Bible, it's bad or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, well, the first part, I don't get it. Well, there's a lot. Here's how you learn. The first part, like, I don't do the whole I don't get it and ignorance thing, because there's enough information in the world for you to have a better understanding. So beyond I don't get it, if you're then at the point where you're like, well, I just think it's wrong because it's not in the Bible. That's just not my theology. And that's been the most freeing part of becoming an adult, and understanding that we have been taught one particular strain and one particular narrative and one particular reading of biblical text that really has come from colonialism and empire, but that the way Christianity and the way the true religion of Christ was practiced pre the Americas is very, very different. And then even now, there are theologians who have a completely different understanding of, there's a book called God and the Gay Christian that's literally all about, it completely blows up the understanding of the passages in the text that are typically used to identify homosexuality as sin. And it says, actually, this is what those texts really mean. And when this word was used in the Greek, it wasn't referring to same gender love. It was referring to pedophilia, which is very different. Like there's all sorts of theories and I guess the foundation, and this is where I probably do differ from a lot of Christians on this, but it's just fact. I don't debate and argue faith and religion. I don't debate things that can't be proven. None of it can be proven. That's what faith is. So you can't tell me for sure that this is what this means. It is open to interpretation. That is my right as a human to interpret a text in a certain way, in the same way that, right, colonizers did. You took a text and you interpreted it a certain way. So I'm just really in support of modern day theologians and thinkers and writers interpreting the text in a way that is more liberatory, that leads to more freedom, that points more towards a direct relationship with God rather than rules and regulations.
Man, I love it. I love it. Got it. Let's see. Let's do a question check-in. I had answered the question about Candace. I found her Twitter and typed it up there. If you have a question, go ahead and type it in, and we'll address it. I will say to you, Erica, we can schedule the release of this at any time. So if you wanted to give us something that might be a spoiler now, but will be relevant in, say, I don't know, March or April, you can talk about it, because this will be coming out later in the year.
Oh, it's perfect. Yeah, the paperback comes out late January, so probably around that time in February, March, that'll be good, and we can talk about it. Because I do talk about both love and faith in You Deserve the Truth, so this is great.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
See?
Always thinking.
Okay, so we got some questions here.
Okay. Oh, look, I can see it too. That is such a real question.
Okay, so let's, I'll read this. This is a question that came in. Theologians believe it, but my mom, the pastor, does not. Now what? So interpret it for us, that question, because it's typed in, so.
Yeah, I mean, and let's be clear, that is, I don't know if that's your specific story, the person who asked the question, or if you're actually coming into my body, because that is also my journey, right? That theologians believe everything that I've said, but my mama doesn't. My mama still has a very particular, my mother, who is also literally the pastor, she has the same framework that she had when I grew up. So I don't know what the now what part means, though, because now what in terms of my relationship with her, it's fine. We love each other deeply. And my mother is, now if I was still living in her house, if I was still 19 years old, there would be a lot of friction, but I'm not. I'm grown and I'm married, and I have my views. It's funny, I wrote about my faith journey in my book, and my mother read it, and she was like, "Oh, it's so great to know what you think." I'm blessed that she's pretty, maybe it's in her older age, she's gotten pretty kind of like, do you? I mean, I still check so many of the boxes for her that I think it's okay that I might believe something different about gender identity, or believe something different, about sexual orientation. I think she's okay with that, because I'm married and I still sing in the church, and I do enough of the things. So that's my specific story. But what I tell others, because that is a real issue, right? When you have a particular belief system that doesn't align with your families or the people that raised you and you spend time around, that's really hard. And while I can't tell you what to do with that relationship, I can say for your own health, it is important to build community outside as well, to find people who do share. Even if they don't share your exact opinion, they share your curiosity and your quest for learning and for evolving and for growing. And having those people around you is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, that was good. I think this follow-up question is actually maybe a good opportunity for you to sort of explain maybe some things that might be coming forward. But are there resources that you use or share with your mother? And I will add to that, not only the mother, but others in the sort of Christian community that need clarification and support in these areas. Yeah.
Here's what I do. I try to tell my mother anything I'm reading that I think will not scare her. And so what do I mean by that? So if you grew up religious Christian, right? Like we were the household that, my younger sister was not allowed to listen to Harry Potter because there was spirits and demons, right? Like that's witchcraft and new age and all that stuff is like, no. So I would not give her a book by Marianne Williamson. I wouldn't give my mother a book that has to do with law of abundance. Like I wouldn't give her that stuff, but I would give her books about millennial culture. What do, under the guise of helping her understand how a new generation thinks. And so anytime I read an article that says like, this is how young people look at relationships now, and this is why. Because I think what I found is really helpful is framing a lot of what I think, and I'll say we in terms of a broader sense of like younger people, modern folks, progressive folks, what we think is framing it contextually in terms of what's happening in our society and our culture, as opposed to, oh, you all just think that because you're young and it's the foolishness of youth and it's sin. And it's like, no, actually, here's why. We saw what happened with marriages in previous generations. And so now we are logically responding to that by creating something better for ourselves. Or no, we feel this way about gender identity because we saw a generation of repressed people, right? We saw people who were committing suicide because they were like giving her literal facts that explain this evolution of beliefs. It doesn't mean she's going to agree with me or believe it. But I think in terms of what I pass on to her, those are the types of resources that I'll share with her.
Awesome. We could take probably one more if you have another one. Otherwise, I want to give opportunity to, okay, helpful. Awesome. Thank you. I want to give you a little bit of time to just, tell us where we should be looking for your content and the sort of storytelling and that you do. And I don't know, are there classes? Like, how does somebody find out more Erica? How does somebody get more Erica in their life?
Yes. So by the time that this is released, which I think is going to be sometime early next year, I will have launched my new project, which is actually called Unboxing God. And it's basically a conference and a community for the rest of us, those of us who are exploring our faith, exploring our spirituality outside of, or even if we're still inside of, maybe on the margins of traditional Christianity and religion, and saying like, hey, let's come together and build community and be inspired and learn together. And so that will have a website and social media and information about events. Also just in general, for what's going on with me, for writings and thoughts and events. I do have a newsletter, which you can sign up for on ericawilliams.com. And it's a monthly newsletter that's going to kind of come out and cover a lot of these thoughts and also all of the new stuff. We will be launching classes next year. So just get on the newsletter at ericawilliams.com. And of course on social, which I'm very sporadic about my posting, but when I do, I'm at Miss E. Will.
All right. That is lovely. I will definitely be signing up for all of the things. It's so great to be a friend and fan of you at the same time and see. Let's see. Oh, there was last one. We'll go back to this question. I love it. Curious to know, of the topics from your posts, you touched on monogamy. You touched on faith. Oh, how about shame? Yeah. So I think we did skirt around shame a little bit around the slut shaming and like the sort of undertones of the undertones that can often accompany religion.
Yeah.
But this is actually the critical point. So thanks for bringing it back up, Kendra. When we are fully formed beings with a 360 human experience, a multi-dimensional human experience, and we're living in the modern world, I think conventional Christianity tells you there is the Christian practice, there's Christianity, and then there's the world, right? And the world is just the worst place to be. Just out there living in the world.
Yes.
Fast, you know what I mean? Just fast, living in the world, X, Y, Z, and you can call it what you want. You can call it sex positivity. You can call it feminism. You can call it gender nonconformity. You can call it whatever it is, but we know that that's just the world and you know who lives, you know who governs the world.
Yeah.
So now that can be used as a device to keep people oppressed and not thinkers,
Mm-hmm.
and literally, like you said, shrouded in shame. So
Mm-hmm.
how does one address that and
Mm-hmm.
and sort of think through it as a sort of modern Christian,
Yeah.
if you will,
So first and foremost, this is really, really big.
without ending up drowning in the world.
Right.
Because you can also do that too.
So I think I'll hit the shame point first, and then I'll answer the broader question about living in the world and all that stuff. I think the really big point that I always try to communicate to people is that shame is not of God. The shame, Brene Brown defines shame. She says, guilt is feeling like you did something wrong. Shame is believing that you are wrong, right? That there is a wrongness to your person, to your identity, to who you are. And that's where shame comes from. And shame is used as a tool to oppress, to restrict. Shame is not biblical. Shame is not aligned. And again, forget Christianity specifically in kind of Bible teaching. If you have any understanding of being either a child of God or believing that the Spirit of God lives within you, then the idea of you being wrong, of there being a wrongness about your existence and your identity, which is what shame is, doesn't work. Those two things don't work. So anytime someone is trying to make you feel shame, you can your antenna should go up and wonder why, and who does me being ashamed, who does my shame benefit and serve? So that's one thing about that point. And so that goes for everything from gender, sexual expression, freedom, all that good stuff. Shame is a no-no. That said, when we talk about living in the world, the whole idea behind that is that there is this idealized way of existing and living, which is the kingdom of God, right? That's this idea of how that there is a place, be it physical or not, mostly non-physical, right, where everything that the world says is right, is wrong, is right, and vice versa. That the meek shall inherit the earth, right? That the least of these shall be the first of these. That the folks who are most oppressed in society should actually be most lifted up. That love should rule rather than greed. That's the kingdom of God. That is the world that we are supposed to be trying to create. And spiritual and religious laws, in theory, should be designed to set us apart so that we can practice that way of living in a world that doesn't honor that, in a world that is very different from that. So to that extent, the idea of being set apart, being different, having different rules, dressing different, theoretically that makes sense. And yet the only way you can spread the values of the kingdom of God is by being in the world, by engaging with the world. And anything, there's another form of theology called process theology. And also I think Octavia Butler said this too, right? That anything you touch changes you, or anything you change, I'm misquoting it, but this idea that everything you interact with, you change and also changes you. Mm-hmm. We live in the world. So that's going to happen. We're going to engage with the world and learn and share culture in the same way that the world is shaped and changed by religion and by faith. So
all
I think that
you touch
changes.
Changes you.
Thank you. That's Octavia Butler, right?
Octavia Butler.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. And so if you think about that, the idea that we would ever be able to live in the world and in no way engage with it or be shaped by it doesn't actually make sense. So I think it's just a matter of having your anchor. What is your anchor? What is your religion? Ultimately helps shape not just your worldview.
You know what? I like that one because and I put another way. It's my dad says you can take the brother out the hood, but you can't take the hood out the brother, right? And I would say that the converse of that is that you can be in the world without the world living in you. You know what I mean? Like You
Yeah.
can operate with your with your faith, with your shield, with your purpose, with your integrity, right?
Absolutely.
And see some stuff going down. Our thing is, I will keep my head in the midst of chaos.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for those questions. Incredible engagement. I hope that was very helpful. And thank you, Erica, for your time and for your wisdom, for your energy. I know I'm going to just, part of the reason that I do this podcast is just a really good excuse to have conversations with people uninterrupted that I want to have conversations with. And then we get to record it and then use it for a great purpose later. But, selfishly, I just really enjoyed it. And I know that many more people will. So thank you very much.
Maceo, thank you always. I told you this before. I was like, I'm a little nervous about this because the questions you ask sometimes on Twitter are so big. I get like stuck for a full day thinking about them. So
Yeah.
Thank you for this. This was a lot of fun, like really digging in and talking about some of these issues.
Yeah, there's nobody else that I would rather have this conversation with besides you. And I definitely don't say that every recording. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to let you go. Enjoy your night.
Okay.
Enjoy your day.
You too. All right. Bye, Maceo.
Bye-bye.